Joining us now is our panel, John Hinderaker, President of the Center of the American Experiment, and Nick Weinstein, Signal Principal and pollster. Thank you so much to both of you for joining us. Let's start with Stephen Colbert. He's right now crying censorship. Let's listen to part of what he had to say on his program earlier this week.
You know who is not one of my guests tonight? That's Texas State Representative James Talarico. He was supposed to be here, but we were told in no uncertain terms by our network's lawyers, who called us directly, that we could not have him on the broadcast. Then I was told in some uncertain terms that not only could I not have him on, I could not mention me not having him on. And because my network clearly doesn't want us to talk about this, let's talk about this.
Yeah, but CBS has hit back, essentially calling Stephen Colbert out for lying to his audience, making it known that CBS did not block that interview with James Talarico. They actually reminded Colbert of the FCC equal time law for candidates and that they provided him with options. John, can I get your assessment? What do you make of this performance, hissy fit by Colbert?
Well, first of all, Gabriella, anything Stephen Colbert says, my default assumption is that the opposite is the truth. So the fact that CBS says, no, that's not true at all, we did no such thing, doesn't surprise me. Colbert has done nothing on his show for years except attack Donald Trump. It's the only thing he wants to do. And he tried to frame this incident into an anti-Trump story. In reality, as you say, the only concern was raised by CBS's lawyers, who said, well, we may have to be concerned about the equal time rule. Maybe you have to have the other candidates on too, which Colbert obviously didn't want to do. Colbert's contract with CBS is expiring or has been terminated. He's going to be off the air soon. And I see this as part of his effort to stay relevant once he's off television as a critic of Donald Trump.
I think you're spot on there. I mean, he's desperately trying to stay relevant, but he's got to come up with some new material apart from lashing at Donald Trump. It's his one trick, really. But Nick, what do you make of all of this? We've also heard from FCC Chair Brendan Carr, who really had a go at the media for falling for Colbert's stunt, saying this is exactly why no one trusts the media. But do you think this controversy might actually help James in the Texas Senate election?
Well, certainly he's announced, a major fundraising haul, but let's be clear. I mean, Stephen Colbert hasn't been funny since he was hosting the Colbert Show during the first Obama administration. The reason he's still on the air is because he's a faithful mouthpiece for the Democratic Party establishment. And what I think is being lost in the debate and lost in the woe is me act from Stephen Colbert is that he wasn't even going to be forced to put Republican politicians running for Texas Senate on the air. He was going to be forced to give equal time to Jasmine Crockett, a Black female member of Congress who's leading in every major public poll in Texas in the Democratic primary, but she is not the choice of establishment Democrats in Washington, D.C. That's this state House Representative James Talarico. So the real question for Stephen Colbert, for me, is not so much, a question of why did you can this interview, but why are you refusing to platform this female member of Congress?
It's a very important question. It's a great point. Look, I know that there is just so much Trump derangement syndrome in the media, but this piece by CNS journalist Stefano Pozzebon I found really interesting about what Venezuela is like 2 months on from the capture of dictator Nicolas Maduro. He writes, it's hard to overstate how different the South American country now feels. There's a new buzz and optimism that, to be frank, I have never seen before. This piece goes on to talk about the time he has spent there covering the chaos in Venezuela over the last decade and writes, the changes happening in Venezuela now are like nothing I have seen before. And the very last line of this piece is quoting a source that says, at least for now, we've got to admit that Trump got this one right. John, can I get your assessment? CNN admitting that Donald Trump got this one right.
Well, that CNN piece is one of the most optimistic things I've read about Venezuela in a really long time. It was especially great to see Chris Wright, our terrific Secretary of Energy, down there meeting with Delcy Rodriguez, now in charge of the of the Venezuelan government. And so Venezuela was once a rich country. It could be a rich country again. And it looks like Rodriguez is awake to the fact that socialism is idiotic, and they need to get back to a free enterprise economy. I think the real question, though, is what is the position of Venezuela's army? It is the army that keeps unpopular dictators like Chavez and Maduro in power. And I don't know whether the Venezuelan army is ready to stand down and allow real reform or not.
Nick, can I get your assessment? And how is this issue being reflected in the polls? I mean, it's been 2 months since Maduro was captured in such an incredible move. But as we know, people tend to move on. What's your assessment of how this is being reflected in the polls?
Well, I think it continues to buoy President Trump, and the American people are very satisfied with the way that President Trump's conducted himself on the international stage. And peace through strength is becoming the Trump agenda here. Certainly, when you look at Venezuela, but what I think is potentially even more compelling to the American people, the further that this develops, is we're at a stage right now where the number two to Chavez is admitting that socialist policies don't work, and that we need to go back to these market-based principles. But we have domestic American politicians who are continuing to beat the drum for these socialist policies. And, the more that Venezuelan people embrace these economic reforms and we get Venezuela back to being the prosperous leader in South America that it once was, the more that these American and European politicians who are embracing the anti-imperialist Maduro double talk, despite the abject failure in his leadership, the more that those politicians' agendas are going to be exposed.
Looking at some of the Democrat politicians, we saw Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez speaking at the Munich Security Conference, and she had this to say about Venezuela.
We look at what happened in Venezuela, for example. It is not a remark on who Maduro was as a leader. He canceled elections. He was an anti-democratic leader. That doesn't mean that we can kidnap a head of state and engage in acts of war just because the nation is below the equator. And
John, this was AOC's big moment to shine on the world stage. She accidentally revealed there that she has no idea where Venezuela is. She was also wrong, I would say, in her assessment of Maduro. I mean, he's accused of rigging elections, not cancelling them for one. Can I get your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I don't think AOC understands what happened here. She talked about kidnapping Maduro, which is not what happened. We arrested Maduro,
Correct.
Who is a wanted criminal. He's under indictment in the Southern District of New York. That was not a kidnapping. That was an arrest pursuant to United States law. And apart from her geographical ignorance, I don't think Ocasio-Cortez understands that.
Nick, AOC on the world stage there, I think left and right, we agree it was pretty humiliating. Will that damage her hopes of running for president, even though she claims that that's not what she wants to do?
Well, I think anyone who's a savvy observer knows that this is what she's teeing up. And the biggest criticism that's going to come for Ocasio-Cortez before we start getting into the nitty-gritty of what she actually stands for, which is itself pretty terrifying, is does she have the requisite knowledge and experience as a backbench member of Congress to represent the United States on the world stage? And this was far from the only blunder from this conference, where she just looked completely out of her depth. And the question that I would be asking if I was, someone in the Democratic establishment deciding, do we get behind AOC for president, is if this is the product of a year of preparation for her rollout on the world stage, is this someone who is going to be up to the task of running the country? And I'm skeptical.
Yeah, I'm skeptical as well. We saw AOC out campaigning for Zohran Mamdani, New York City mayor. He's now called for the state to increase taxes on corporations and the wealthy to help address the city's budget deficit, warning that the alternative option will be for the city to raise property taxes. Listen to this.
There are two paths to bridge this gap. The first is the most sustainable and the fairest path. This is the path of ending the drain on our city and raising taxes on the richest New Yorkers and the most profitable corporations. And if we do not go down the first path, the city will be forced down a second, more harmful path. Faced with no other choice, the city would have to exercise the only revenue lever fully within our own control. We would have to raise property taxes.
Nick, can I get your assessment of this? I mean, what a message for homeowners. But I want to know, are we still in this Mamdani honeymoon period after the election, or has that really dropped off now? People know what they're getting.
No, I mean, I think that there has already been some chinks in the armor. There was a major winter storm on the East Coast, and historically, the NYPD would go out onto the streets of New York City and help get mentally ill homeless folks off the streets. And because of Mamdani's extreme socialist agenda, they were told not to do that. And I think 18 people, as of the last count, died of frostbite in America's most prosperous city. But this has been the problem with the Mamdani campaign from the get-go, is that the math just didn't add up. And, you know, he likes to talk about just raising the taxes on the wealthy, but in New York State, 1.6% of the population is already paying 49% of the taxes. You know, how much more can we ask them to continue to pay and expect them to stick around? It used to be the old adage, as long as Wall Street's in New York City, the financial services industry will have to stay. I hate to break it to folks, the internet's a thing now. Financial services does not need to be in New York City adjacent to Wall Street anymore. And Mamdani seems to be doing everything in his power to push them away.
Well, on that point, analysis by New York's top corporate advocacy group shows that New York is losing thousands of jobs to pro-business Texas, and Mamdani's push to raise corporate taxes is certainly only going to accelerate that exodus. This is coming from a report issued by the Partnership for the City of New York. John, no surprises there, really. Can I get your assessment of Mamdani's latest announcement?
Well, New York City is losing jobs and business to Texas and also to Florida. New York City does have a budget crisis. Why is that? Because they spend an unbelievable amount of money. The current budget for New York City is $116 billion. Mamdani wants to raise it to $127 billion. $116 billion happens to be exactly the same as the budget for the entire state of Florida, which has almost 3 times as many people as New York City. That level of spending is unsustainable. The taxes are unsustainable, and people are fleeing New York City and New York State, and they're leaving to Texas. They're leaving for Florida. They're leaving for other states that are more business friendly. And everything Mamdani is doing is going to accelerate the decline of New York City.
Let's turn to the tensions with Iran now. There's growing speculation that there could be a US strike on Iran within days. Axios is reporting that a Trump advisor indicated that there was a 90% chance of some activity taking place. John, I want to get your analysis on this. Of course, recently Donald Trump said that regime change in Iran seems like that would be the best thing that could happen. What do you make of this? What's your assessment of what's likely going to happen here?
Well, the administration has been negotiating with the mullahs over nuclear weapons. I think that is completely pointless. We have been down this path before. All they're going to do is stall for time. I think bombing is likely, but to be honest, Gabriella, it is probably impossible to overthrow a regime like the mullahs simply through bombing if you're not willing to put troops on the ground. And the reason is that they control the Iranian army, and the army is willing to shoot protesters. We've seen that over the last few weeks. And as long as that is true, I don't think there's any amount of bombing that is going to bring about regime change.
Also this week, Iran's supreme leader threatened to sink US aircraft carriers that have been sent to the Middle East. He mocked US military strength to his followers, warning that even the world's most powerful force can receive a slap so severe it cannot stay on its feet. Let's listen to it.
رئیس جمهور آمریکا که ارتش ما قوی‌ترین ارتش دنیاست. قوی‌ترین ارتش دنیا ممکنه اونچنان گاهی سیلی بخوره که از جا نتوانه بلند شه. هی میگن ما ناو فرستادیم طرف ایران. خیلی خوب. ناو البته یک دستگاه خطرناکی است، اما خطرناکتر از ناو اون سلاحی است که می‌تواند این ناو رو به قعر دریا
Nick, can I get your analysis on this? We know Donald Trump gets pretty top marks for his foreign policy, but there's a lot of pressure on him with this one at the moment.
Yeah, look, I think the last time I was on this program a couple of weeks ago, ahead of some Trump talks with the Iranian regime in Oman, I said that I had a feeling that the Ayatollah in the leadership of the IRGC probably weren't getting a lot of sleep after watching what happened to Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. And certainly these comments suggest that maybe the Ayatollah is a little bit cranky because they're completely out of touch with reality. The Ayatollah knows, the IRGC know that they're almost powerless to stop the United States from taking military action against the regime. They were completely humiliated by the United States and by Israel last year with the strikes on the nuclear program. And I think the only question that is still outstanding is what's the scope of what the United States is going to try to achieve here? Is eliminating the Ayatollah? The goal is eliminating the Iranian nuclear program. Further, the goal, what is the end goal here? Because I have every confidence that our military will be able to prosecute the goal, but I'm skeptical that this can be done, a complete rebuilding of the Iranian government purely through airstrikes.
Okay, we have to leave it there. Nick Weinstein, Signal Principal and Pollster, and John Hinderaker, President of the Center of the American Experiment. Thank you both so much for joining us.